While training for size and strength is undeniably correlated, achieving the knowledge to be able to differentiate the two according to your goals is vastly, vastly important, especially as you become more advanced in your training. So today, I would like to share with you the knowledge to be able to either get as jacked as you possibly want or as strong as you possibly want. When I say size, I mean muscle growth, which is the enlargement of your pre-existing muscle fibers. This is mediated through volume, which is the total amount of work that you're doing per body part per week. This is sets times reps times weight. So whenever you are increasing any of those variables, then you are increasing the total amount of volume, and thus you are stimulating more growth. Strength, on the other hand, is more of a skill. It is primarily driven through nervous system adaptation. You need to be practicing certain movement patterns under very, very heavy loads, and by doing so, your body will naturally recruit more motor units and thus produce more force. Therefore, intensity is the primary driver of strength adaptation. Lastly, I'd like to make it clear that while you can emphasize either size training or strength training, you cannot separate the two entirely. There's always going to be some sort of overlap. Whenever you are training for size, you are going to be getting a little bit of strength gains. When you are training for strength, you are going to be getting a little bit bigger. They cannot be fully ripped apart. However, if you do everything right, if you follow each of the modifiable variables that I am about to list, then you can kind of distinguish and optimally train for one over the other depending on your goals. For muscle growth, a combination of compound lifts that target 3 or more muscle groups at any given time, alongside isolation lifts which target at least one muscle group at any given time, is ideal. So you want a combination of the heavy hitters like your squat, your bench, and your deadlift, included with some isolation work on the top. That's kind of like your icing on the cake. Now, the reason for this is that if you are only doing a surplus of the compound lifts, then your fatigue amount is going to be way too high before you hit your volume parameters that you need to hit. In other words, if you are only doing compound lifts and you need to hit a certain amount of volume per week, you are going to fatigue way faster than you are going to be able to hit that volume. Therefore, having a combination of compound lifts and isolation exercises will be able to make it possible for you to hit that volume threshold without overdoing your fatigue too early on in your program. So in terms of specific exercises, you definitely want to be including a little bit of both. You want your squat, your bench, your deadlift, but also maybe a row, a pull-up, stuff like that, other compound lifts. And in addition to that, you definitely want more isolation lifts like quad extensions, bicep curls, tricep extensions, hamstring curls, stuff like that. You want a variety of all these different exercises so that you can hit different angles, so that you have more of a different stimulus for growth, but you're also not overdoing it in one direction or the other. I like to make it clear that you can get strong at any lift that you desire. However, that doesn't mean that every lift really lends itself perfectly to strength training. For example, if you're trying to get maximally strong at a bicep curl, the injury risk to reward ratio is just not there. You probably end up hurting yourself before you get anything real out of it. Therefore, focusing more on compound lifts that train more functional strength, like maybe you focus on a pull-up or a deadlift, these are more functional strength movements that don't have a very high injury risk when you are overloading them. And that's why most strength training programs typically only consist of exercises like the barbell back squat, deadlift, and bench press. These movements lend themselves very, very well to strength training programs. For muscle growth, you want to start with your compound lifts since they require the most effort. in the beginning of your training routine, you are going to be the most freshest, and therefore you can deliver the most effort and intensity towards each of your sets. So if you are starting with isolation exercises, sure, you can get a lot out of them, but by the time you get later on into your training day, those compound lifts are going to seem almost impossible, and you'll be more likely to skip them altogether. Therefore, I like to start my training programs with those heavy compound lifts because I can really attack them with vigor and intensity. And then when I get to my isolation exercises, while it's still going to be difficult, isolation exercises just don't require nearly as much of an effort at all. So starting with those compound lifts and then going into isolation exercises is just a much better rhythm and will produce much more gains as a result. For strength, since pretty much all of your lifts are going to be big compound lifts, you just want to start with whichever one you want to specialize on or whichever one you are weakest at. This is because when you are first walking into the gym, you are going to be the freshest and thus the strongest. So whichever lift is lagging behind or whichever lift you just want to get stronger at is the one that you want to lead with. And that goes for the whole order of your training program for that day. You want to start with the ones that are more important to you or the weakest ones, and then build from there. For size, anywhere from 5 to upwards of 30 repetitions are going to elicit the same amount of adaptations. Now, this is under the caveat that each set is a hard set. In other words, you want to be taking your set to near or to absolute muscular failure. In terms of sets per week, anything from around 15 to 25 sets per body part per week is going to elicit maximal results for muscular growth. Now, I just want you guys to be aware that these are averages, so you may have to play around with the total amount of sets per week per body part for yourself to see what's right for you. For me personally, I like pretty much 18 to 20 sets is my sweet spot. Anything more than that, and I find it very difficult to recover from. Anything less than that, and I feel like I'm not pushing myself hard enough. For strength, you want anywhere between 3 and 6 repetitions per set. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is not a very big range at all. Now, the reason why it's just this little small range is because you need to be lifting very, very heavy weights in order to elicit nervous system response and adaptation. So you need to have that sweet spot of around 3 to 6 reps. Anything more than 6, and you won't be able to lift a heavy enough load to stimulate the response. And anything under 3 is probably just going to be too much for your body to handle. It could increase your injury risk. While you can definitely get strength gains out of less than 3, what is found through the research is that 3 to 6 is probably ideal. This equates to around 80% or more of your 1 repetition max of intensity. So if your 1 repetition max is 100 for your bench press, then you want at least 80 pounds on the bar or more. Now, keep in mind, you don't want your volume to overshadow your intensity here. You need to keep it at bay for best results. It's been seen time and time again that an optimal frequency for muscle growth is hitting any given body part between 2 and 3 times per week. And the reason for this is that if you are only hitting a body part 1 time per week, say you hit your legs on Monday, then you wait a full 7 days, a full week to hit it again, you're gonna be recovered by Thursday max, probably, if you're really being honest with yourself. So that leaves at least 3 days where you're just sitting around doing nothing, where you could be applying another stimulus for growth. On the other hand, if you are having frequency of 4, 5, 6, 7, then you just need to be super, super careful, because you can easily impede your recovery and thus really minimize the amount of growth that you get per session. So 2 to 3 just seems to be a great sweet spot for most people. In fact, if you go beyond 3, the amount of improvement in muscle growth is very marginal at best, even if you are managing your intensity and volume levels on a day-to-day basis. Strength, on the other hand, can go all the way up to 7 times a week frequency if you are really careful about it. This is because strength does not rely on the same adaptation stimulus for increased gains. Strength is more of a skill, like I previously mentioned. So as long as you are not burning yourself out, as long as you are giving yourself enough quality rest, then you can hit it upwards of 7 times a week. You just need to be very careful in this. I think that most people, they probably hit it around 3 to 4 times a week just to be safe. But you can definitely go beyond that if you play your cards right, if you program correctly. Rest periods are easy. For both size and strength, you just want to rest as long as you need to be able to deliver the utmost quality for your given sets. So if it takes you 10 minutes to recover, take that 10 minutes. Just make sure that you are hitting your sets with the most intensity and vigor that you possibly can. If it only takes you 30 seconds to recover, then so be it. Now, the caveat here is that with hypertrophy or muscle growth training, you likely don't need upwards of 5 minutes. You're probably going to be recovered in around 1 to 3 minutes. Versus strength, it will typically take 3 to 5 minutes. But those are just averages. You got to play around with it. You got to see however long it takes you to recover is how long it's going to take. The progression for size is any increase in volume. This is progressive overload. If you increase your sets over time, that will elicit more growth. If you increase your reps over time, that will elicit more growth. If you increase your load over time, that will elicit more growth. However, you cannot just be aimlessly increasing these variables day after day, because your fatigue will just go way too high. It will go through the roof and it will end up in a setback. So you need to strategically provide this progression over weeks, over months. Strength, however, requires an increase in load and intensity. This is best done by just focusing on proper form and optimizing your technique. As long as you are getting more proficient in the exercise, then I promise that the load will naturally go up. Now that, however, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be programming load increases. You should definitely be programming them to push yourself. But as long as you're focusing on that technique and pushing as hard as you can while following that proper technique, I promise that the load will come. In a nutshell, hypertrophy or muscle growth size training is elicited through increases in volume. It is simply having a mixture of compound and isolation lifts, having adequate rest times, doing 5 to 30 repetitions a set with proper intensity in place, and really hammering a 2 to 3 times a week frequency. As long as you are following those parameters, you will be doing pretty much everything you can to get the most gains that you can from your training. For muscular strength, you want to just be following the essential movement patterns and then focusing on nervous system and form adaptation. So you really want to be pushing heavy loads for 3 to 6 repetitions with adequate rest times in between and as much frequency as your recovery will allow. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that this helps. Good luck in your training.